Hello. It's going to be another video that's a little bit um, generalized. It's not part of the regular series I'm doing. Someone asked me a couple of days ago why occult spirituality, so to say, isn't taken seriously in the West. If you look at this in the context of the East, of China, for example, you also say in the example of India, but in the case of China, because the question was asked in the context of the importance of the I Ching to Chinese civilization, right? This book, which is basically an occult book, it isn't just a book of oracles. It's also a whole system. You can see in the cover here, there's the pattern of the cosmology of the I Ching hexagrams. It's a system of understanding the universe and of space and time. And that ended up being at the center of the model of Chinese spiritual thought, to the point that it was the I Ching that influenced later philosophies like Confucianism and Taoism, and even Chinese Buddhism has influences from the I Ching. And to put it in a context, let's look at maybe one of the closest equivalents in Western European at least, or rather European Western culture. It'd be something like the tarot, right? Now, the tarot is an occult cosmology made of symbols that tries to create a symbolic map of the universe and of the path of the self, just like the I Ching does. So imagine if the tarot, well, first of all, imagine if it was much older, and then imagine if it was the central text that all throughout Western history was looked at, that if you wanted to have a position in any court, in any royal court, you had to have studied the tarot. If you were any kind of a philosopher, imagine that all the greatest thinkers of the West had written about or taught about or contemplated the tarot. Poems are written about it, right? This is the equivalent place that the I Ching has in Chinese culture, right? You had to study the I Ching as one of the classic texts in order to enter the public service, which was a very big deal to their culture, of course. And you had almost every great thinker of Chinese history that, to one extent or another, some more than others, investigated the I Ching and commented on it in some ways. You had the greatest poets making poems connecting to the symbols of the I Ching. It took a central place in their culture. Alongside religious traditions. And that's an important point, because of course in the West you have the Bible, which took that same central point, but the Bible had kind of its metaphysical, its cosmological elements, the occult elements, you could say, the elements that are, and by occult here I'm really meaning those elements which are esoteric in nature, a religion that isn't just about how to practice socially, or the ones that are initiatory and are about the process of self-transformation. That was kind of stripped out of the Christian religion at one point, and so there was left this big gap. Now, what happened was that instead of having an esoteric and an exoteric, an outer religion and an inner religion, an outer process of mostly social religious practice, the rituals of the spirituality of your culture, and then this underlying tradition that was the place of the initiates, the people who were at the stage where they were looking for self-transformation, for enlightenment, for cultivation. that both of those things were working together. You didn't really have that in the same level. You still had it in the West, but you didn't have it in the same level that you saw in places like China or India, because of that kind of excising of the esoteric from the Christian religion. So in Judaism, you have it, for example, with the tradition of the Kabbalah. And this has created a completely different perspective that most Jewish people have towards their understandings of the relationship of spiritual consciousness with general religion. You don't have this kind of antagonistic relationship of, you know, this here is old-time religion, and that over there, that's devil worship, you know, or something like that. So this is a problem, because that meant that all of the equivalent traditions, what you see in the I Ching, in the West were marginalized, and many of them were then historically lost, and they weren't commented on, and they became more and more so over time the domain of marginal groups, and of fringe people, which in some respects, you know, my fringe people are some of my favorite people, right? I really like fringe people. But it has the problem that fringe people are a mixed bag and have very low standards of self-filtering, you could say, of having some kind of standard. So when modernism came along, and the idea of rationalism, that was kind of the death knell, because there was in the West this tradition of this growing tradition of what Francis Yates calls the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, where you had for a little while there, after the wars of religion in the 17th century, this movement of great thinkers who were thinking great things about everything. They were thinking about science, they were thinking about spirituality, they were thinking about all these things together, right? You see this, for example, in Isaac Newton, who was spending as much time contemplating the nature of the spiritual nature of alchemy as he was physics. But then the rationalist movement kind of sweeps all of that away, and within 100 years after that, he, you know, really Newton was the end of that. He was around the end of that period, and then by the late 18th century, what you see in the West is that there's been a complete break between the idea of science being the way we understand reality and things like space and time, things like the nature of the cosmos. And then on the other side, you have occultism, which was at best something that was seen as a kind of a system of teaching morality, and at worst was the domain of frauds, right, and con artists. And this has kind of proceeded ever since. What this means in terms of occultism, in terms of all esoteric practice in the West, because I'm not just, when I'm saying occultism, I don't just mean literally, you know, magic people and tarot readers and things like that, you know, psychics or Reiki healers or any of that stuff. But I mean also, you know, the all alternative spirituality in the West, that today all of those movements have this reputation that brings them into this place of being something that regular people look at at most as entertainment. Most regular people mostly ignore it, right? But the ones that are drawn to it either as entertainment, or they're drawn to it as a means to get around, to avoid their problems in life, right? As a kind of a cheap alternative to some kind of, like if you were some of a certain type of person, you might go to a therapist, and if you're of another type of person, you might go to a tarot reader, right? But a lot of times what you're doing when you do that, in either case, right? But we're talking about the alternative spirituality here. You're doing it not to resolve a problem, but to find out how you can avoid a problem, right? And this is more so, because if the view in modern society of a therapist is it's somebody you go to when you want help to resolve a problem. So at least you might get people that are trying to still avoid their problems, of course, when they're going to therapy. But at least there's this idea of that being what you do. Whereas with the tarot reader, the idea is I've got to go and find out how I get out of this, right? And that's it. So what you have is a marketplace in the modern Western world of alternative spirituality that is mostly populated by this kind of spiritual materialism of customers who want something on their terms and of the style of a quick fix. And I guess that, in short, is why I'm never going to be very successful at alternative spirituality in a business sense, right? Because I can't bring myself to teach that. So that's the short answer as to why the West went the way it did compared to places like China, and both in the good and the bad, right? Because of course that rationalist movement also led to things like the Industrial Revolution and to huge changes in society. It's also the explanation of why we're at where we're at right now. And if you're asking, well, why isn't, I saw a video the other day of somebody saying, well, why aren't, tarot readers or Reiki healers treated as seriously as psychologists and lawyers? Well, that's why. It's because of those historical reasons, and because of what those historical reasons have done in terms of both the people that get involved in it and the people that go looking for it in the point of view of being, the customers, if you would. Is there something that can be done about this? To a certain extent, in the sense that there's something you can do about this. And the first thing is, don't go into it with that perspective of spiritual materialism. Don't go into it looking for a quick fix, looking for an answer, looking as though, the spiritual teaching that you're trying to find is going to be a service that you're going to get from somebody, and then there'll be some kind of a process of exchange there, and then you get to solve your problems or something like that. If what you're looking for is actually cultivation, then you have to change your attitude and alter yourself from the perspective of being a customer purchasing a product or something like that. And you have to look at, first you have to find something authentic, right? But let's assume you do. And then you have to treat that authentic thing as though it was something that has all the seriousness that you would anything else that you were engaging in to try to understand the nature of the universe itself, right? So you have to treat it with the same kind of I'm not saying with the scientific method, but with the same kind of seriousness that you would philosophy or literature or the humanities or the sciences. You have to act as though this isn't some kind of an entertainment, or to be intellectually lazy about how you approach it, or lazy in terms of your practices either. Right? This isn't the same as, well, you take a hot yoga class once in a while, right? Or something like that. You need to be willing to engage in it as if it was actually important, and ask yourself, am I engaging in it as if it's actually important? And if you're not sure if the practice that you found or the teaching that you found is authentic, that's often the way to find out. Is that if you are actually being serious about it and not doing it because you're hoping to get some kind of a quick answer or a quick fix, look at the practice that you've been drawn to, or the teaching that you've been drawn to, or the teacher or the system or the book or whatever, and ask yourself, is this something that is going to take me years of effort and commitment to really advance in? And if the answer is no, then probably what you've got there isn't going to be of any use to you. So if you're looking for a fast fix, you're not being an authentic seeker, right? And if what's being offered is a fast fix, then that's not an authentic teaching. And you have to be ready to do the process of cultivation with as much seriousness as you would, as the Chinese students of philosophy did, who are working for decades to understand the mysteries of the I Ching. Alternative spirituality will be taken seriously in the West only when there are people who become serious about how they approach it. So that's everything for today. Be sure to check out the other videos in this channel and the different playlists. And if you're interested in a serious system of cultivation, then please check out especially the playlist of the Fa Society, and get in touch with me if you would like to undertake that as your process of self-transformation. Thank you very much.